to episode 2 of You Are Crazy. I'm Matt Ledikanen. I'm a Christian pastor.
I'm Joshua Sotomayor Einstein, and I am a Jew.
Tonight's topic, we are just going to be wrestling through the question, is democracy important? Because a lot of people don't really seem to necessarily think that it's super important that we hang on to it. I think I saw a tweet. I did some really serious research on this. I'll let you in on it. So I just researched democracy, or so I Googled that in the Twitter search bar, and I found a great tweet. He said that, let me pull that up actually. It's easy to support #communism, living in a democracy. Please try to support democracy in a communist country, then let me know. And that was from Delu, 1989. So I don't know what kind of background he has, but that's an interesting thought.
Oh yeah, I mean it's a fun, sad topic at the same time, right? Simultaneously, it's fun to poke fun of the totalitarians that exist in our society, and at the same time, it's a sad fact to recognize that people flee towards democratic countries and away from totalitarian countries, whatever type of totalitarian it is, classic dictator with no ideology, or sort of secular utopian ideology, like the various strains of communism or socialism. People are fleeing, for example, from Venezuela to other countries, not from other countries to Venezuela, for example. Mm-hmm. But I think it's an interesting topic, democracy, and I think it's important that we note that democracy isn't always good, because in its Greek root form, it just means rule by the people. And if you don't have that limiting element that I as an individual, or that all of us as in ourselves as individuals have certain inalienable rights as recognized by U.S. Constitution and others, that the majority just doesn't have the right just to take away, your freedom of speech or your property or your ability to make a livelihood, or
your
to
rights aren't taken away by the mob.
Yes.
There you go. Yeah.
Because that's at its core, democracy can be really conducive to waxing philosophic and wrestling with ideas. But in a just pure democracy, without any limiting factor, you have that sort of ability of 50% of the voters plus one extra person can then take the rights away from the 49%.
Sure.
And that's definitely not a good thing.
Yeah, and I think that you hit on a really, really important piece there, is that, pure democracy in the original Greek form, just the 51% majority, or 51.1%, that'll take the rights away from this group, or will make a sweeping declaration of law over a society. And what's really critical, especially in American democracy, is that there's this idea of all men are created equal in the image of the Creator and endowed with certain inalienable rights. And that's very. Granted, the writers of the Constitution inherited a lot of their ideas from Christianity, though they may not have been Christians themselves. Many have argued that they're deists. Others see that otherwise. It's not what we're talking about.
Well, they're not mutually exclusive necessarily.
They're not mutually exclusive. Deism is much deeply informed by Christianity, especially the deism that they were practicing.
Plus, people have been known to believe two things at once that are mutually exclusive. Not myself; those people bother me, but they exist.
Right, but that idea that we all have these rights, and it's connected to the idea in the Hebrew Bible, Christian Bible, of the Imago Dei, the image of God, that we are God's children, God's creatures, and we are chief among His creatures, and so because of that, just by being His image bearers, we have a dignity, a value, a beauty that is completely contrary to anything else, or superior to anything else in all of creation. So the government and democracy especially really lifts that up in the individual, more so than other totalitarian, communist, or maybe even socialist states, where the individual is minimized in interest for the community, which I see merit in that idea but taken too far, it can be very dangerous.
Well, I think there might be merit in the idea as a voluntary proposition. If someone wants to see themselves or connect with others as part of a whole, and it's something that they elect to do, whether it's in religion in the Jewish community, or they elect to do it as a Christian, be part of the Christian sort of communion, so to speak, or in any other group, or even a civic association. As long as it's their choice, I think the fact that they're making that choice has a value. But if it's something that's top down, that they're not given a choice for, and it has, it comes with negative sanction, that if you don't do this, you're going to end up in jail, then I think it's a vice, because it's not the person's actual, they didn't make an affirmation rather, to do so. It was essentially a gun to their head. Like, for example, a lot of people used to like to be down on the previous pope, whose pre-papal name was Ratzinger, and his pope name was Benedict number something.
It was Roman numerals.
Roman numerals, yeah.
That's why we can't remember.
Arabic numerals all the way.
Yeah.
But people like to be down about him because as a child he was a member of the Hitler Youth. But he didn't have a choice. He didn't elect to do that. It was the law, and his parents would have gone to jail. So as a child, not wanting your parents going to jail, he joined the horrible, horrible, evil youth group, but not by choice. And that's what you have when you don't have the sort of classical, important values that we're talking about. And actually that Pope Ratzinger, or Benedict something, to paraphrase him, he said that the Western world in which we enjoy these rights is based on three pillars: the philosophy out of ancient Greece, where we get the antecedents or the beginning of the democratic idea; monotheism out of Jerusalem, what Jewish people, yeah, and the church out of Rome. And I think we can expand all those concepts to be more broader, but I think largely that's what made the modern world very successful. And I think there's such important values. Obviously, we shouldn't emulate everything that the Catholic Church or the early church did, and definitely not everything that the Hebrews did, as recorded in my people's Bible, and definitely not everything the Greeks did. They said tons of messed up stuff, tons. But there's a lot of value in all of those, which made our modern understanding of democracy, not in the literal sense that we were just discussing it, but really important.
Yeah, and what you were just saying reminds me of mentioning the origins in the Hebrew Bible. A lot of the things that we kind of cherish as a society, and a lot of the things that have kind of been passed down as democracy as an idea has formed. Kind of, we can see pieces of that in Scripture. And you can see originally when the people were clamoring for a king in ancient Israel, and Saul was then anointed. Well, there were a couple things were wrong with that. One, God was intended to be king and is the sovereign ruler over his people, and it was the critical thing that set them apart from other peoples in the Near East culture, is that they were being ruled by their creator, which was pretty significant. That's a difference, a theocracy, if you will, a true theocracy in the truest of terms. But and then there was they established the monarchy, and you had some thoughts about that, I think.
So I think in its least harmful form, I don't think there's necessarily a tension between a theocratic or theocratic inspired governance and the sort of classical individual rights that we're talking about. There's a lot of Western European and other states around the world that have state churches and whatnot, and the state of Israel is defined both as a Jewish and democratic state in today's Middle East, and it's managed to be both. So I definitely would actually like a little bit more of that theo in our society, even in America. Okay. But if we look at the Hebrew Bible, the political leader, the king, is definitely less than ideal situation, as you're pointing out, and the high priest, the head, from a religious point of view, are mandated, obligated to be separate people. because you can have a situation where you have the ancient Israelites whose national and religious identity are the same, but even the Bible recognizes it that these are two separate authorities, or that they need to be kept in two separate vases, so to speak.
Okay.
And obviously, the ancient Israelites weren't always so good about keeping those offices separate. The Hasmoneans that we celebrate in Hanukkah as fighting off the Hellenists, they were like, no, we're the king and the high priest. We know we were murdering, the Hellenistic Jews and the Greeks because we want to be more authentic. But then 2 seconds later, they're like, but this rule doesn't apply to us. So obviously they weren't always perfect. I don't think there's any really perfect fairy tales in the Bible. But I mean, it's written with people that have real flaws. Because
it's one of the best things about it.
But,
real people.
But I mean, the principle is there that they're supposed to be separate, and I think that's a good thing. Culturally, I definitely like to have more religion in our democracy here in the United States.
Yeah, the thing about more religion I don't disagree. I think I think I was fascinated. I remember seeing something like during like World War II. And the president at the time had issued like a national day of prayer for the troops. And I'm like, that would have been completely unheard of today.
No, you can do that today.
That'd be insane today. But how far we've traveled as a society, as a culture, that we would be doing that in the most recent, there has been significant wars since World War II, but like kind of enshrined in American memory is World War II. As a significant time, and that there's prayers there, and how far we've moved. I think the issue for when, church and state and having more God in state and kind of secular places as mandated by law, something like that, is like, when the government gets a little too big, and we see this in Germany, in Nazi Germany, where the church was kind of co-opted by the Nazi Party. And there were a few, like Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a Lutheran pastor, who saw what was happening, and he actually set off and created his own seminary, trained up his own pastors to be teaching the way of Jesus, but not in cahoots with the national church. And that he ended up being executed in a concentration camp for what he did. He was actually involved. He was a spy too. He was involved in an assassination plot. Hitler, like Dietrich Bonhoeffer, had like a crazy life, but he saw his role very uniquely. But when the point being, when you bring those two things together too closely, 9 times out of 10, that's a recipe for disaster. So keeping that distance is a healthy and wise thing.
See, I definitely think there's a danger there, both to the church and to the state. But I think, I'm sure other religious groups do this too, but in the Jewish community, you have prayers for, not just the country, but prayers for the head of the country. It doesn't matter who the head of the country is in the United States. We want them to be, guided by wisdom and forethought and good values. And even now that Trump made that peace deal between Israel, the United Arab Emirates, and I believe Qatar, right after that was done, the Jewish community was busy writing prayers for the health and the wisdom of the rulers of the United Arab Emirates, because even though they're not by any means, they don't have any democratic values, but there's still been, you could still be a good king. I mean, preferably just turn it over to democracy with limited government and the rights of individuals. But there is still a spectrum of the good king versus the bad king. Mm-hmm. And you still want to hope and pray for that person's success, and that they choose the path of righteousness. Yeah, sure. So I think that's important to keep in mind as well.
Huge, yeah. I mean, in Christian tradition, we have the same thing. I mean, in our Lutheran tradition, we have a, prayers of the church, and you can just download a Word document off of the internet now, and there's always a prayer for the elected officials, the president, everybody, the state level, anybody you can think of. I mean, it's deeply in the New Testament. And certainly in the Tanakh, but also in the New Testament, there's so much present. Romans 13 comes to mind, 1 Peter, and how we are admonished as Christians, as followers of Jesus, to be like not just subservient to the government, although that's very true, fourth commandment kind of stuff's being mindful of authority, but also to be praying, to be contending for the well-being of our nation, and essentially being the best possible citizens of that nation we possibly could be, whether that's a democracy or a socialist country, or even in a dictatorship. I mean, the thing that's kind of crazy about the Romans 13 passage is Paul's writing this most likely during the reign of Emperor Nero, and you know how well he liked Christians. He was burning them on crosses during his garden parties to illuminate the evening. Like,
that's not a good party.
That's not a good party, not a good vibe.
Don't do that to anybody.
But I mean, the fact that he's writing those words in response to like the government, it's pretty startling and really raises questions. But unrelated to that, I think we both watched the debate last night. We've talked about how the presidential office and like our democracy itself has changed and shifted with culture and attitudes and moods over the past few decades. Like, what do we see as the future of our democracy right now? What do you think right now? Like,
So I think we're going through a rough patch, and I think there's people on every side, in every faction, in every section. I think a minority, but in every section, that are clamoring for more absolutism, whether it's just their way or the highway, by the end of a Molotov cocktail when it smashes down, or if it's by absolute majoritarianism, which is the worst form of democracy. And I think commitment to the classically liberal norms of individual rights, of your stuff being your stuff, and your opinion, you having your right to an opinion, is at a not maybe an all-time low, but at least definitely in our lifetime low. I think there's a historical echo. I think it was Mark Twain who said that history doesn't repeat itself as much as it rhymes. So I think there's definitely time periods in the past where the sort of tenor of discord between two prominent factions or two prominent political leaders have gotten as heated as it is in the current era. And I definitely think in the terms of in the worlds of like letters and newspapers and political magazines and then now online sites, we have the same parallel, earlier on in history to when there were so many opinions being voiced, and sometimes they get nasty. So I do think we'll get through it, and I think at the end of the day, we'll be an even better country. But people need to come back down to earth a little bit, and remember that we do have more in common than our differences, and that if we all stay committed to the idea that I believe you to be wrong, and you believe me to be wrong, and we can still be friends, then we'll get through this, and the country will be even stronger.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you. It's like we need to have, democracy, a thriving democracy is built on just a free exchange of ideas. And if there is not that happening, and not just like in terms of who is censoring who, or that's important. We can talk about social media another time, but like reality is, I think it's really the content of our conversations that's really been poisonous and fractious, and how instead of dialogue, it's just name calling. Instead of, any kind of productive conversation, it just devolves into what we may have seen in the debate last night, where it's not a free exchange of like ideas and like, oh, I'm seeing your points, sharing ideas and thoughts and visions for a new future of America. It's just kind of, chimpanzees throwing feces at each other. It's just like, it gets crazy. So that's all the time we have for the evening. But thank you, Josh, for your thoughts.
Always good.
Really enjoyed the conversation. Join us next time for our upcoming episode. See you later.